Well, hello there, my dear viewers and listeners. Another episode of Mass Effect vs Warhammer 40k is here. This time, in accordance to the vote taken by my Patreon supporters, I will present the reaction of Mass Effect Galaxy to the shocking displacement of Farsight enclaves into their universe. But before we begin, remember to like, comment, subscribe, ring the bell, the whole shtick. You know what to do. If you can, support me through Patreon. I would also encourage you to donate to Art Budget for Star Wars x Warhammer 40k series through Ko-fi. It's thanks to your donations I can commission real artists and give my narrative series its own art gallery. With all that out of the way, let's begin! A quick reminder of the scenario we are discussing. The Farsight enclaves, set before the Arcs of Omen, are transported into the Mass Effect Galaxy in 2157. The same year, the Systems Alliance and Turian hierarchy clashed in the brief conflict known as the First Contact War. The enclaves ended up on the far side of the galaxy, near the Rosetta Nebula. There they surveyed, studied, and fortified the region after discovering the mass relay, which they quickly recognized as a potential gateway into their territory. In 2169, the relay was activated. A corporate survey mission entered the Enoch system, only to be met with a heavily armed warfleet and fortress stations guarding the entrance to the enclaves. In the previous video of the series, I explored how Farsight himself might respond to the reality of this new galaxy. This time, we will look at how the Mass Effect Galaxy would react to the sudden appearance of this strange alien civilization. And the first reaction would, of course, be shock and confusion. After all, it's not every day you stumble upon a spacefaring civilization beyond the relay. Especially one boasting such overwhelming firepower, technology apparently free from the Prothean influence, and, on top of that, claiming to originate from another galaxy, if not an entirely different reality. Naturally, this would cause widespread skepticism and suspicion across the galaxy. Many would dismiss the claims of being transported from another reality outright, at least until confronted with undeniable evidence, including the presence of Gwevesa within the enclaves and a variety of bizarre artifacts. Honestly, it's hard to predict how people would react after learning about the grim dark galaxy. Many would dismiss the story outright, claiming it's fabricated. Others, however, would seize on the knowledge of the Imperium of Man to portray the Systems Alliance as a dangerous, malicious force, framing its expansion as the first step towards some genocidal conflict. There could even be a wave of panic, with demands to deactivate the relay, leading to the enclaves out of fear that some of the 40k horrors might spill into this galaxy. Then there is Oshova himself. To the Tau, he is a living legend, a true hero, revered by his people. But to the rest of the galaxy, he would look like a benevolent dictator at best, a warlord at worst, a commander of a fiercely militaristic state. And there is the matter of his unnaturally long lifespan, which breaks every expectation for his own species. How do you even begin to approach someone like that? A commander who fought in countless wars and survived horrors that most species can hardly imagine. Even the eldest Krogan or Asari, those rare few who lived through the final days of a Krogan rebellion, would struggle to match the sheer weight of Farsight's experience. After all, He has stood against Imperial crusades, orc wags, and even demonic incursions. And that's not even touching on the Tau's casual use of AI. How do you deal with a civilization that openly ignores the Citadel's strict anti-AI laws? Worse still, one that includes an AI oblatai on the Enclave's ruling council. In time, things would settle down. People, by nature, will want to continue their lives without constantly fearing horrors beyond their comprehension, especially if those horrors remain out of reach. The same goes for Farsight rule and Tau's reliance on AI. Those are facts the galaxy would have little choice but to accept, no matter how uncomfortable they make people. But the bigger question is how the galaxy major players and certain individuals would react to the enclaves themselves, because whether anyone likes it or not, the Tau are here now, and they cannot be ignored. Let's begin with not a faction, but with a single person. Someone very important within the Terminus systems, and whose power base lies not far from where the enclaves now reside, at least by relay travel. Aria, the undisputed ruler of Omega. Effectively, the queen of the Terminus underworld, with Omega serving as the unofficial capital of smugglers, pirates, and mercenaries. Aria is the spider at the center of that web, pulling strings through blackmail, influence, and black market deals. She is arguably one of the best informed people in the galaxy, second only to figures like the Elusive Man or the Shadow Broker. So, how would Aria react to the sudden appearance of enclaves? I can tell you one thing for certain, Aria wouldn't be happy. The enclaves are a military powerhouse. True, unlike the Tau Empire, they aren't expansionist by nature and prefer to remain within their own borders, but that doesn't mean they couldn't change their minds. And if Oshova ever decided the enclaves should become the dominant power in the galaxy, or even just within the Terminus systems, then Omega would be the first step. Omega isn't just another system, it's the beating heart of the Terminus, a hub sitting at the crossroads of major and minor mass relays, making it the perfect staging ground for rapid movement throughout the region. Whoever controls Omega controls the flow of power in the Terminus, and Farsight would know this. Aria, for all her resources and connections, would understand she couldn't possibly win in a direct conflict with the enclaves. So instead, she'd do what she always does best: cut deals, forge alliances, and negotiate whatever arrangements are needed to ensure Omega remains exactly what she wants it to be: a heaven of vice, chaos, and opportunity. As for the countless pirates, mercenaries, corporations, and small independent states that make up the Terminus, they'd be terrified. The whole point of living in Terminus is to escape the Council and their suffocating idea of order. But now, suddenly, there is a new force in the region. One with its own version of order, and the sheer firepower to impose it if they decide to do so. To say the faction of Terminus would tread carefully around the enclaves is an understatement. They'd be walking on eggshells, doing everything they could to persuade Farsight's forces to stay put, remain contained, and do not expand in any direction, because they'd quickly realize what would happen if anyone was foolish enough to poke the enclaves with a sharp stick. And speaking of poking dangerous foes with sharp sticks, let's talk about the reaction of Batarian hegemony. And the Batarians' reaction? A total freakout. Through their network of mercenaries, pirates and slavers, the Batarian hegemony carved out a solid power base in terminus systems. Their language even became the lingua franca of a region. Now suddenly they are faced with a challenger, not only with a strong military, but one with an uncompromising hatred for slavers. Just like I've said before in my Star Wars vs Warhammer 40k videos, when it came to the Tau Empire facing the Hutt cartels, a conflict between them was unavoidable. Their philosophies are complete opposite, and neither side would ever change their ways to accommodate the other. The exact same dynamic applies here. In fact, it's even worse for the Batarians, because as decadent the Hutts are, they are also cunning, and when pressed, they can rally significant military power, reminding the galaxy of the days of the ancient Hutt Empire. The Batarians, by contrast, are far weaker, so weak that even the upstart Systems Alliance has managed to push them around, yet at the same time they are arrogant and foolish enough to actually believe they could take on the Enclaves. Consider the timing. By 2169, the Batarians were already preparing to leave the Council, and by 2176 we have the Skyllian Blitz. The timeline isn't far off. They were already furious at humanity's expansion, and the arrival of Enclaves would be like pouring gasoline onto the fire. The real question is, who would they attack first? Because either way, they are destined to fail. And once they fail, they won't have the strength left to strike at the other. Worse still, no matter which side they choose to target, they risk driving the Systems Alliance and the Enclaves into some kind of cooperation. And that's where things get especially grim for the Batarians, because while Oshova may distrust humanity, he despises slavers far more. If the Skyllian Blitz played out with the Enclaves present, Farsight forces would almost certainly offer their support to humanity. On the flip side, if the Batarians struck at the Enclaves directly, the Systems Alliance would likely share every scrap of intelligence that they had to help the Tau crush their mutual enemy. In short, I don't see a single scenario where the Batarians gain anything from the Enclave's arrival. No matter how you slice it, they lose. And since we already touched on the Systems Alliance, let's move on to how humanity would react to the appearance of the Enclaves. And let's just say, there would definitely be tension. Especially over the existence of Gwevesa within Farsight Enclaves. By all accounts, these are humans living under alien control, but they aren't subjugated in the usual sense. For the most part, the vast majority of them are refugees or former prisoners of war, people who escaped the horrors of the Imperium of Man and found peace and prosperity within the Enclaves. I struggle to predict how the human government or the public would react to this. To put it into perspective, the total human population in the Mass Effect galaxy is around 12.5 billion. The Enclaves have a dedicated human-designated planet, Gwevesario. We don't know the exact population of the world, but it's safe to assume it's substantial. No one gets their own planet if there are only a handful of them. Let's be conservative and estimate the Gwevesa population at 2 billion. Personally, I would put it closer to twice that, or maybe even at 10 billion, but let's stick with the 2 billion for now. That means 13.7% of the total human population in the galaxy, more than 1 in 10 humans, are Gwevesa serving Enclaves. How do you even approach a situation like this? Would the human government expect the Gwevesa to join the Systems Alliance or become citizens? How could that even work? There are no cultural ties, no shared language, and a 38,000-year evolutionary gap. the Gwevesa might as well be considered a human subspecies. Would this spark a new form of racism directed at the Gwevesa? Would the very existence of humans loyal to the Enclaves provoke fears with a vision of what would happen if Turians won the First Contact War and subjugated humanity? Could this radicalize the human population against the Tau and strengthen organizations like Cerberus? On the other hand, the Tau saved these humans from the horrors of the Imperium. Would the Gwevesa stories temper xenophobia instead, or even shift human perspective towards empathy and caution regarding the dangers of a grimdark future? Honestly, there is no simple answer. There are too many factors at play. Realistically, both scenarios would occur. Some humans, perhaps supported by Cerberus or Terra Firma, would become more radicalized. Meanwhile, others would become acutely aware of xenophobia dangers and the horrors it could unleash. So this would most likely cause significant political polarization within the Systems Alliance. Relations between humanity and the Enclaves would be tense, no doubt about it. Thankfully, for the most part, they would share common enemies, like the Batarians, and their territories aren't close enough to create direct border tensions. Careful cooperation with the ever-present threat of a conflict with Cerberus in the background seems like the most likely scenario. Speaking of Cerberus, the Elusive Man would almost certainly view the Enclaves and Farsight in particular as enemies. Humans loyal to aliens? That's a worst-case scenario for him. Destruction of Enclaves and the liberation of Gwevesa would likely be one of Cerberus' goals, only for him to realize that the Gwevesa aren't oppressed at all and many live far better than they do under the Systems Alliance. This would probably lead to some convoluted scheme to eliminate all Enclave-aligned humans. After all, if you are not with Cerberus, you are the enemy. That's how they operate. Now, we talked about Aria and the Elusive Man, but let's bring up the Shadow Broker, who would have his own problems. Any figure with power, money, or influence would want access to every scrap of information about the Enclaves. But the Enclaves are somewhat isolationist, preferring to keep to themselves. Getting spies or intelligence from them would be a monumental task. Even reaching Enoch's system would be hard, let alone penetrating the core worlds of the Enclaves. Through traders and diplomats, the Shadow Broker might manage to gather some information, perhaps even set up a rudimentary network, but it would likely be one of the greatest challenges he'd ever faced. The Tau have an independent tech tree, and AI safeguards their systems. Many servants of the Machine God have burned out cogitators trying to hack them. It's impossible to know how much useful intelligence he could actually secure. And of course, that would frustrate his clients, including the Citadel Council. The Council's reaction would be layered. On one hand, they would likely see Farsight as a warlord or dictator, dismissing the idea that he could be anything else. On the other hand, his military might is formidable enough to challenge the Council, making him both the key to securing the Terminus systems and the lock that could shut the region off for as long as the Enclaves endure. Then there is the issue of the Tau's blatant use of AI. Do they try to convince them to abandon this technology, or do they attempt, likely in vain, to sanction it? I suspect the Asari, at least initially, would attempt diplomacy, but they would likely be rebuffed. As I mentioned before, they somewhat resemble both the Ethereals and Eldari, with their strange powers and subtle influence. And I think Farsight would reject them outright. The Salarians, on the other hand, would probably become obsessed with studying and stealing Tau technology. you can be certain that STG operatives would work tirelessly to infiltrate the enclaves and gather as much intelligence as possible. Unfortunately for them, the enclaves have experience dealing with Drukhari and Gene Stealers, so I don't expect many successful operations on this front. The Turians would likely have the most success in communication, primarily because their diplomacy is straightforward, usually at least. Farsight, as a Firecast, respects directness. Any deal or agreement would almost certainly require Turian intermediaries. This would naturally benefit the Volus, who control much of the galaxy's commerce, giving them significant leverage in any negotiations. As for the Hanar, Drell, and Elcor, there is little to say. They lack political power to influence the Council, and the Enclave's arrival doesn't meaningfully impact their daily lives. In the end, I expect the galaxy to see some form of non-aggression pact, an anti-piracy treaty, and likely trade agreements. The Tau use of AI won't stop the Citadel or corporations from wanting access to their technology. They would push their politicians to make the deals happen. The Krogan? Indifference is probably the most likely scenario. The Enclaves are on the far side of the galaxy, have little direct influence, and are unlikely to intervene in the Krogan's struggle. Outside of some mercenaries offering services, interactions between the Krogan and the Enclaves would be minimal. Next up, the Quarians. Here things get interesting. The Quarians and their migrant fleet have been betrayed and manipulated in the past, leaving them deeply distrustful. On top of that, their traumatic experiences with the Geth means that witnessing the Tau's casual use of AI could create serious tension on multiple levels. Not only do Tau use AI, but they have coexisted with it for quite some time without it ever turning against them. There are also striking cultural similarities between the Quarians and the Tau. Neither society relies on currency internally, both prioritize collective welfare over individual gain. Another fascinating parallel, the Tau create AI based on the memories of deceased Tau, allowing relatives to communicate with their ancestors. The Quarians once had something very similar before the Geth rebellion, and the destruction of those databanks stands among the greatest tragedies they've endured, alongside being forced from their homeworld. I expect Quarian society would be deeply divided over the Enclaves. However, over time, with skilled diplomacy from the Watercast and enticing offers, I believe the Quarians would ultimately ally themselves with Farsight. Within the migrant fleet, opinions differ. Some wish to find a peaceful resolution with the Geth, others want to enslave them again. Some aim to establish a new colony and start fresh, while others hope to retake Rannoch by force. The simple fact is, the Enclaves might hold the key to every one of those outcomes. The Tau have exceptional diplomats and a healthy tolerance for AI, opening the door for a potential peace treaty. Their technology could, in theory, hack the Geth and return them to servitude. Tau terraforming capabilities could allow the creation of an ideal Quarian colony, or if necessary, construct massive space stations capable of housing populations equivalent to the entire planets. Finally, with the Enclave's military strength, a reconquest of Rannoch wouldn't be a challenge. It would take time and extensive negotiations, but I believe the Quarians would eventually become allies of the Enclaves. And I have little doubt that external pressure would push them towards this outcome. After all, the galaxy neither accepts them nor treats them fairly, and discrimination has always been a constant threat. Ironically, the Quarians would have the last laugh, as they would be valued within the enclaves and likely prosper far more than many other civilizations in the galaxy. It's also an interesting question how the Geth would react, because they would have to. At this point they are largely isolationist, but they still monitor developments in the wider galaxy. The Tau's casual cooperative relationship with AI would be a pleasant surprise, while an alliance with the Quarians would be deeply alarming. The Geth collective would face serious internal turmoil should they prepare for war, align with the Reapers, or attempt a peaceful approach before the enclaves take Rannoch by force. I would expect the number of heretics within the Geth to swell while the main collective debates the proper course of action. Whether a peaceful solution is possible or even desirable remains uncertain. They might deploy a legion-like unit sooner than expected to investigate the enclaves, but there are also too many variables to predict for sure. Now we've covered almost everyone's reaction, except one faction, or more precisely, the two representatives of that faction during this era. The Reapers with Sovereign and Saren as primary figures. How would they respond? Saren would likely see the enclaves as just another obstacle. Their harboring of humans would disgust him, and the stories of the Imperium would reinforce his hatred for humanity. Sovereign, on the other hand, would be concerned. You might wonder how a 2-kilometer tall mechanical cuttlefish that has existed for countless millennia could feel concern about the enclaves. Here's why. The Reapers manipulate civilizations to follow specific technological paths, ensuring they develop in predictable ways. This gives the Reapers a degree of control over technological and military progression. They can intervene and clean the slate before a civilization grows too advanced. The enclaves, however, exist outside this system. Their development was completely independent, and they already possess weapons that pose a direct threat to the Reapers. Shields in Mass Effect are excellent against kinetic weapons, but struggle against energy-based attacks. The Tau railgun wouldn't pose much of a threat to the Reapers, but plasma, ion, and even laser weapons certainly would. And yes, the Tau do have laser weapons. They are just not as commonly used as other types. The same goes for their lack of reliance on Mass Effect fields for FTL travel. The Tau have their own system. It's not perfect, but it works, especially when combined with the fortifications guarding the only real entrance to the enclaves. On their own, the enclaves would become one of the major threats to the Reaper's plans. Finding a conduit would still be a priority, since sheer numbers could theoretically overwhelm the enclaves, but Sovereign would almost certainly recognize them as a serious threat. Deploying the collectors against the enclaves would be largely futile, at least while the Tau remain in their fortified space. The Reapers might try sending the collectors to manipulate pirates or slavers into capturing some enclaves personnel for testing, but that would be risky. Collectors' warships, while formidable compared to the other Mass Effect civilizations, would struggle against the Enclave's vessels. Plans for infiltration and manipulation would need to be carefully crafted, but Farsight and the Enclaves are especially cautious when dealing with the unknown. And with that, I believe I've covered the major players in the Mass Effect galaxy and how they would likely react to the arrival of the Farsight enclaves. I'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions. Do you think my analysis is reasonable, or have I missed something important? I'm always eager to see your take on these ideas. Either way, remember to like, comment, subscribe, and ring that bell. If you can, support me through Patreon or Ko-fi. Thank you for joining me, and I hope you enjoyed. Now, my dear viewers and listeners, remember, wherever you are, whatever you do, try to enjoy yourself. While you can, I wish you most heretical day. Ta-ta!